intimate. Okay, great. I'm going to do a quick intro of the video game, and then we'll get straight into it. So Windrush Tales is a narrative game that reflects the arrival of Caribbean immigrants who were invited to rebuild post-war Britain between 1948 and 1970. OKRE has supported the world's first video game based on the Windrush generation, and it comes from microgame studio Threefold Games, whose mission is to create games that explore topics that are often ignored or overlooked by the mainstream gaming industry. That was a lot. Let's get into it. So, when it came to the idea of creating this game, you worked with Shella Ramanan, who is a narrative designer. How did you go about creating this video game? Let's start from there.
So initially, Shella wanted to celebrate the 70th anniversary of Windrush. And she didn't really know what she wanted to do, whether it's going to be a short story or a poem or something along those lines. And she was already creating a game called Before I Forget, which kind of like explores a woman suffering from dementia. And for some crazy reason, she thought, why not make another game as well while she was still developing that one? Do not recommend creating two games at the same time. I've done that myself. It's a path to insanity. And so she approached me because she knew me from me being a guest on her podcast, and she knew I was a writer and wanted to kind of get basically people of Caribbean background to work on the game. So she asked me to be the writer for the game, and so we started kind of like getting to work on that. And then the Windrush scandal happened, and that totally blew our initial ideas out of the water, because we were looking to create a game which was going to elevate the culture. It was going to celebrate, really kind of like look at how the strength and determination of this generation, which includes like my grandparents, my parents, coming to settle in this country and be part of that. And the scandal really just kind of, it made us upset, it made us angry. There was a lot of phone conversations over like, what should we do in terms of approaching the game from that perspective. And we thought, well, especially from the perspective of our friends and family, they said like, well, this game is even more important now because a lot of people up to the Windrush scandal didn't actually know much about Windrush. That was their first exposure to it. So being able to examine the Windrush generation, the trials and tribulations that they went through, everything that they experienced from both angles. Obviously, there is a lot of pain, there's a lot of challenges that they went through, but also mixing that with the sense of celebration of the music, the food, the culture, everything that came from that, and try and encapsulate that into a game became the main challenge up to that point.
Yeah, and I know that when we spoke before, I was really intrigued to understand how you balance the authenticity of an experience like that, but also make engaging gameplay at the same time. Like how did you go about that?
Yeah, that's the difficulty. So I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize that when you're creating a game, you're having to look at a game from the perspective of two genres. So you have the gameplay genre, and then you have the narrative genre. And you try your best to merge those things together to create a compelling experience. So for example, everyone knows about Grand Theft Auto as a game. The gameplay genre of that is a sandbox action adventure, but the narrative genre of that is usually satirical crime. So when it came to exploring something like this, you're always having in mind the fact that the genre will usually dictate things like budget. Grand Theft Auto is a multi-million-pound franchise. We don't have multi-million pounds. We're a very small studio. There's only 6 of us at the time. There was only, I think, about 3 of us at the time. And we wanted to look at how we could capture the authenticity and the realism of the Windrush generation's experiences without feeling like it was being cheapened in any way. We're not going to make like a first-person shooter out of it, for example. We've got to have to make sure that it feels accurate and representative of what they were going through. And naturally, that lended itself to a narrative adventure of some sort. And as we kind of started to delve into that a little bit more, we realized that we didn't want to make it just like a prose adventure where it was like you're making choices and really kind of going through the life of a person of that generation. That's all still very important. But Shella wanted to make it a bit more tactile, a bit more approachable. So she looked at the way that the Windrush generation, for part of their journeys arrived with just one suitcase. They were arriving with a suitcase which is smaller than my overnight bag that I came from Birmingham last night with. And that was their entire lives. And that suitcase didn't just have clothes in. Sometimes it had like a Bible in it or something which was intricate and necessary to their connections back at home in the Caribbean. And so we wanted to look at like capturing that through the use of objects and how that objects were important to their lives. And that kind of evolved into the photo gameplay, where we kind of like, you're taking photos from the experience and life of two people, a brother and a sister, that have come from the Caribbean, and kind of using those snapshots to open up parts of gameplay that the player then goes through and has to make choices about, you know, when you're trying to find culture, when you're trying to find community, what do you do when you're turned away from a white church, for example, but you still want to be able to express that part of your faith. All these little bits of that part of your life that we wanted to kind of like explore, but not just to make it from writing down kind of like, here is a choice that you need to make and this is what the consequences of that choice are, which made my life a little bit easier as a writer, because it's like effectively writing a novel. And
you also have that element of you're carrying different people's experiences, so that's lived experience. I know that part of your process was conducting some focus groups at the University of Birmingham. Could you talk about that experience and how that feedback played into the game? Yeah, it was, for us, that was essential. For a game that needs to represent real world people and their experiences, especially with it being so close to us from a family point of view, we wanted to get that experience, and not just from people that were close to us. So we held 2 workshops, and the first workshop was really kind of like talking to people from that generation, and also, you know, their children and their children's children, and kind of exploring what they went through, their experiences, just a general perspective, but also touching upon what they expected from a game that involved their experiences as well, which was also really important. And then the second workshop was actually us showing them the game. And then getting their feedback from that, which was incredibly intense, to the point where, like, my mum was actually part of that as well. And we had a journalist. Well, I won't name him. As a very well-known Caribbean journalist that's written books on Windrush, and the whole experience was so powerful that Shella and myself came away from it very emotional. And I had this like delayed effect, basically, where it took me about a day or two, and I was in the kitchen, I was cooking, and my wife came into the kitchen, and she looked at me, and she was like, "What happened?" Because there was like tears running down my face. And I was just like, I just realized, you know, it's very easy to understate how important the game is to us personally, but speaking to people that you don't know and getting their feedback, you know, whether it's good or bad, it all contributes towards the creation of the game. Was a really powerful, transformative experience in itself, because you really try to understand exactly what it means to them, and the fact that because it's the world's first Windrush game, everybody's got to have their experiences and expectations of what that is going to be. Yeah. So yeah, it was important, but really quite difficult at times. Thank you. And with that, you can have a look and take a look at the game experience. I think there's just towards the end there, to kind of get a glimpse of what you're talking about. Thank you so much, Corey. And yeah, enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you.